You and I understand a lot of things about the world, and in order to do this, we somehow have to encode these understandings into the neurons within our brain. In a similar way, LLMs have to encode the understandings they have into their neurons inside their brain. What does this actually look like, though? One simple idea is that models just assign each neuron to a concept. Let's imagine a model with two neurons. Each neuron can be thought of as a dimension in a coordinate system. Each dimension can act as a direction for a concept. Let's say the x direction represents dog and the y direction represents car. If I ask, where did the dog go? The model detects dog and the neuron corresponding to the x-axis activates. Same for car and the y-axis. Dogs and cars are cool and all, but there are more things to talk about. What if we want to add more concepts, like history? One option is to add more neurons to get more dimensions. Let's add a third neuron. Now we have a 3D coordinate system and can represent history using the z direction. Now again, this is cool, but what if we have a ton of concepts? I mean, the collection of human knowledge is vast and filled with an immense amount of different things and ideas. It seems unlikely that we could just create a neuron for every one of these without the models becoming impractically large. Here's another idea. X and Y aren't the only directions in our 2D coordinate system. There's actually an infinite amount of directions in between the two axes. Let's take this direction, 45 degrees from the X and Y axes, and call that the history direction. Now we have three concepts encoded with only two dimensions. Here, each neuron is part of the representation for multiple concepts. This is a phenomenon known as superposition, and it's what allows models to store more concepts than it has dimensions. However, you might have noticed a slight issue with the current arrangement. Let's say the model reads something about history, causing both X and Y neurons to light up. We actually can't tell for sure if the model is thinking about history just by looking at which neurons light up. It could be thinking about both dog and car at the same time. When two concepts sharing the same neurons occur at the same time, this results in this problem of interference. And interference is bad because it makes the model less reliable in telling what it's talking about, which lowers its accuracy. Despite this, LLMs have found a way to minimize interference enough to still get the benefits of superposition. And the way they do this is not only interesting for understanding how LLMs think, but it actually might rely on some research that we've spent the past century studying. In order to understand this, back in 2022, Anthropic built the simplest models they could that would still exhibit superposition, resulting in one of the most foundational papers in mechanistic interpretability, toy models of superposition. To look at these results, it's important to understand the language of the paper. You see, I've been using the word concept to kind of explain the ideas or things that a model learns about the world. Now, in the paper and in the general field of AI interpretability, these things are called features. It's important to mention that features don't necessarily have to be interpretable to humans. It's completely possible that through optimization and learning during training, a model will learn features that humans just don't understand. This becomes increasingly likely as models outpace us in intelligence and just learn things we do not know about yet. Because of this, a more general way to think about a feature is as any concept that would get its own dedicated neuron in a sufficiently large neural network. This is the definition that the paper chooses to run with, and it has an interesting implication about the hypothesis of superposition. The strategy of superposition is just a way for the model to simulate this larger hypothetical network that can dedicate a single neuron to each feature, inside the smaller network that the model is actually made up of. Because the model's actual network is smaller, it can't simulate the larger network without some information loss, and it's the minimization of this loss that creates the amazing structures used to organize features. So how are these toy models set up? Well, first, the model needs to have features to learn. The paper creates synthetic features that rely on three assumptions. The first we already know about. There must be more features than there are dimensions in the model. The second is that features must vary in importance. This arises as a consequence of how normal human language works. Some concepts are more important than others. There's a reason we start with certain vocabulary when learning a new language. Some words show up more often than others, and knowing the common ones help you understand more than knowing the obscure ones would. The same applies to LLMs. Importance helps the model determine how helpful this feature is to learn, as well as how damaging it is to have this feature experience interference. The last assumption is that individual features are generally very sparse in terms of how often they activate. This is another consequence of how human language works. Dog is a concept humans use all the time, but in any given sentence, the odds that dog specifically comes up are tiny. Most features are like this, relevant in general, but rarely active at any given moment. This assumption is crucial for superposition to occur. If feature A activates 1% of the time and feature B activates 1% of the time, then the odds of both of them activating at the same time is 0.01%. This makes the odds of interference so low that the model can utilize the benefits of superposition at almost no cost. Now, with the necessary feature assumptions in place, let's look at these toy models. To start, they trained multiple toy models with 5 dimensions on 20 features, with each feature having an importance equal to 0.7 to the ith power. This essentially makes each subsequent feature 30% less important than its predecessor. Now, this diagram might seem confusing at first, but at a high level, it shows how increasing the feature sparsity allows for more superposition, which allows for more features to be learned. This first row of figures represents the matrices that are used to project the feature vector with 20 dimensions into the model's network with 5 dimensions. If we multiply the feature vector by the identity matrix, which is when all diagonal entries are 1 and the rest of the matrix is 0, we end up with the same vector. When sparsity is 0, we see that the projection matrix looks like this identity matrix, just for the top 5 most important features. This means the model perfectly projects these 5 most important features into its network and chooses not to include the rest. With no sparsity, every feature fires constantly. Any overlap between feature directions would create constant interference, so the model can't afford to share dimensions at all. Its only winning strategy is to pick the most important features it can fit and give each one its own neuron. We can see this with the diagram below, showing that the 5 features exhibited 0 superposition, which is represented in black. As we increase the sparsity, the matrix starts to lose its identity-like shape by having non-zero values on the non-diagonal entries. These matrices end up projecting more than 5 features into the 5-dimensional model, resulting in more superposition, which can be seen by the increasing yellow bars in the diagrams below. This is exciting because we can see that this idea of cramming more features into a smaller model actually plays out in real models, albeit simple toy models. What's even more exciting is that by increasing the dimensions and amount of features for these models, we can truly start to see the beauty of superposition by looking at the geometric structures that the model organizes these features in. The researchers expanded the size of their models to 30 dimensions and gave them 400 features to learn. To further simplify the experiment, they started off with uniform superposition, which means the importance and sparsity of all the features were equal. Just like the first experiment, they trained multiple of these models at different sparsity levels. Before looking at the results, we must quickly go over the dimensionality of a feature. This is a measurement of how much a given dimension a feature takes up. For example, if a feature is in a direction that is fully orthogonal to all other features, then its dimensionality would be 1, since it takes up the whole dimension. If you have an antipodal pair of features, which is when 2 features share a single dimension by pointing in opposite directions, then the dimensionality of each feature would be 1/2, since they each take up half of the dimension. This measurement is useful because each value of dimensionality corresponds to a geometric structure, which we are about to see. Now, at first glance, this graph can seem quite intense, so let's go through it slowly. As we move along the x-axis, we increase the sparsity of the model's features, which again are equal for all the features within a single model. Each of these colored bands represents a different value for a feature's dimensionality. This is where the interesting geometric structures that form can be seen. For example, look at the structure here for a feature with a dimensionality of 3/4. This means that each feature takes up 3/4 of the direction it's pointing in. In order for the model to do this, it organized these features into a tetrahedron. Similarly, at a dimensionality of 2/3, the features were organized in a triangle. At 1/2, we have antipodal pairs, and so on for other shapes at 2/5 and 3/8. 2 interesting things pop out from these results. First, it's clear that the optimization pressures from interference and superposition created a lot of elegant polytope structures. Something about these geometries made them the optimal structures to prevent interference at those levels of dimensionality. Now, some of you might be getting deja vu from physics class. That's because the same shapes appearing in these toy models, the triangle, the tetrahedron, the digon, are the exact solutions to the Thomson problems in physics, which ask how n amount of electrons will arrange themselves on a sphere given their adherence to Coulomb's law. Secondly, the structures that these models form seem to cluster around specific values of dimensionality. This clustering is actually a pretty surprising phenomenon of superposition. Optimization of neural networks is generally thought of as a very continuous process in which values slowly change to an optimal setting. If superposition followed that same pattern, we'd see structures gradually morph from one shape to another as sparsity increases. Instead, we see them snap into discrete bands. That's not a continuous process, That's a phase change. Again, you might be thinking back to physics class. That's because this process resembles the way molecules in water go through phase changes as it transitions between a gas, liquid, and solid. Here, we see two distinct phenomena that arise as a result of superposition that also seem to arise in the world of physics. It's quite incredible that structuring these feature vectors in this abstract information space, which seems so disconnected from the physical world, has such great parallels with it. It's exciting too because this might actually have some pretty useful implications for the field of AI interpretability. I mentioned earlier how these models were done using uniform superposition, but in actuality, real-life LLMs that we use every day likely have non-uniform superposition, since it's unlikely that words in the real world have the same importance and the same level of sparsity. The paper accounts for this and runs more experiments using non-uniform superposition and found that the resulting structures and phenomena are just deformed versions of the uniform ones. This means that the underlying principles from the uniform case also apply to the non-uniform case. And if it's true that commercial LLMs are non-uniform in nature, then these underlying principles that relate so much to physics might just apply to the LLMs that we use today. If LLMs are truly using physics-like principles to figure out how to organize the features within their neurons, then we already have over a century of research into statistical mechanics that might actually help us understand how AI thinks. The math that we've already been developing for the physical world might actually be the key to understanding this abstract world in which the LLMs think in.